Hello and welcome. We're excited to have you here today for our webinar, getting Canadian M&A deals done in the area of Canada-U.S. tariffs. We have a large audience today, so we're going to jump right in. A lot of ground to cover, and there's so much going on when it comes to tariffs and the implications on deal flow that we want to get right down to it. So our goal today is going to be to have our panelists speak for 30 minutes and then provide for questions at the end. We have a question function. Please feel free to write out your questions. We'll read a bunch of them at the end for about 15 minutes, try to get as many as we can. We're going to start the panel by introductions. My name is Mario Nigro, a partner in the private equity and M&A group at Stikeman Elliott. And we're hosting this panel today with the ACG Toronto chapter. And thank you for joining us. We're going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. And so I'll start with Sylvia. Sylvia, you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mario. So Sylvia Rasic. I'm a partner and senior managing director with Deloitte's corporate finance group. We're a mid-market M&A shop focused on sell-side and buy-side advisory services to privately owned companies across Canada. We are active in all major industry sectors, and I focus on industrials. It would be being one of our most active groups, and specifically, we cover building products, building services, packaging, transportation, logistics, and renewables, and among others. So I'm very excited to be a part of this panel today. Thank you for inviting us.
Marc?
Yes, so Marc Paiement, senior partner, Novacap. Toronto-based. We're the oldest PE group in the country, close to 45 years in business. We manage $10–11 billion of assets under management, and that's across 4 funds: a digital infrastructure fund, a tech fund, financial services fund, and an industries fund. We have 32 platforms in Canada and the U.S., and obviously tariffs are an everyday thought right now. Thank you.
Chip?
Thanks, Mario. So I'm a partner with Blue Point Capital Partners. We operate out of offices in Cleveland, Seattle, and Charlotte in the U.S. Solidly middle market. We sort of target businesses with 10 to 50 million of EBITDA. We do a lot in what I'd call blue-collar business services, a lot in distribution, a lot in manufacturing. And we've been very active in Canada for a very long time, I think going back to 1998. We have a couple platforms in Canada. Currently, we do a lot of add-on activity there. And just speaking personally, I have a cottage in Muskoka. I'm there quite a bit. And I took a look just for fun, sort of at the State Department website about what was top of mind in 1998, sort of the first time I came to work on a deal in Canada between the U.S. and Canada. And there was a ton of talk about the extension of the Pacific Salmon Treaty. So I think we really are kind of in uncharted waters right now. It was a much simpler time back then.
Jean-Guillaume?
Yeah, so thank you again, Mario, for the opportunity. So for the introduction, I'm a Montreal-based partner at Stikeman Elliott. I'm the head of I'm the national head of Stikeman's commodity tax and international trade practice, and of course, one of Mario's partners.
I'm going to jump right in to the key question. Obviously, we've been hearing about tariffs. It feels like almost every day, on and off. And I wanted to get a sense from you, Sylvia, Marc, Chip, how have tariffs affected your deal activity? I mean, the core of this webinar is to get a sense of the impact that it's having on M&A. And so we wanted to get a sense from you. Are you seeing less deals because of the tariff talk? Are you cautious, sitting on the sidelines? Are you holding back? What are you seeing from a deal activity, deal community perspective when it comes to tariffs in real time? Marc?
Yeah, well, obviously, we have a few deals in process or about to be in process. And the current situation, we're waiting or going slow with a few of those processes. So I imagine some of our peers do the same on the other side. So the deal activity may be a bit less. And we tend to be, it's very hard to bid on any EBITDA you don't know. And that's the problem right now. It might end up good or end up bad, but at least we know how bad, or we know are good. And right now we just don't know. That's so yes, we are waiting a little bit on that.
Sylvia?
Yeah, I echo Mark's comment. It's kind of too early to tell. We're actually at Deloitte really busy right now. We're flush with deals, we're flush with discussions, but we're quite active. We're quite mindful. But that being said, as we're having discussions, understand the impact of tariffs on the business and whether it's holding back a process. We haven't done that yet. It's helping strategize and scenario analysis, financials, and what scenario could be. But right now, we're still pushing and driving hard on deals. As we are earlier stages, as we're planning timing, there could be a delay. But right now, we're still quite busy. Discussion, when we have discussions, it's prospective buyers are both the PEs and the strategic. And I think when we talk about it a little bit later, but that's where the discussions are becoming very different now.
Chip?
I think that makes sense. I think, Mario, it's important to set this in the context of the market as it is right now to begin with. Like, you've got a pretty cautious market even before tariffs. So, if you look at stats in the U.S., something around 60% of deals brought to market last year didn't close. And that's an incredibly high number. I don't know, Sylvia, it's sort of in your world, you're seeing any kind of rate like that. But the market was already highly cautious with sort of, deals were kind of dislodged fairly easily. And I think for a lot of people, just given the uncertainty as Marc described, it's really hard to, once it's settled and you know what you're looking at, it's easier for now, until there's a little bit more clarity and certainty. I do think, we've got a very cautious posture, and I think you're going to see that across the industry.
Yeah, just one more thing, if I may add, Mario. We just this morning spent 2 hours with our LPs just making presentations on each of our business, on the impact, the mitigating strategies, and that. So we're spending a lot of time on that. And when we look at deals, we have that in the back of our mind. So it slows us a little bit from that perspective.
Jean-Guillaume, I know you've been incredibly busy lately, fielding questions left and right, center, from everywhere. Wanted to get a sense from you, what are the key kind of questions you're getting regarding tariffs? Like, what is top of mind? What are the issues, questions you're dealing with the most?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mario. And I would say that the main questions I get related to potential strategies, of course, that could be implemented to obviously reduce the impact of the tariffs for businesses. But as you can imagine, unfortunately, of course, is that there's no silver bullet here, right? Or like one size fits all solution that could solve all the problem. You probably imagine that. But and another point interesting is that it's also the fact that clients, they're not necessarily willing at this stage to put in place like really costly or permanent changes to their business structure, right? Especially because first of all, we don't even know if the tariffs will be implemented in the first place. And also for how long they will stay in place, right? But that being said, in terms of, let's say, easy strategies that businesses could implement, we have the really easy one where, let's say, businesses would simply like import really large quantities of goods to boost inventory levels, let's say, either in Canada or the U.S. And of course, you would do that right before the date, the effective date, the tariffs would be enforced. And by the way, you would not implement this in a dumping context, but that's another another topic. Yeah, and you have also strategies that could potentially lower the value for duty of goods for customs purposes. In this case, it would be in the context of transactions within the same corporate group. However, one thing I should say here is that my experience says the option is really more complex. And the other point is that the main objective might not necessarily be achieved. And the reason why, it's because transfer pricing reviews, as you may know, that they're mostly prepared for income tax purposes. And those reviews are based on what we call the OECD guidelines. And the purpose here is, of course, is to meet the income tax requirements in the countries where these are implemented. However, and that's important, it's possible that the transfer pricing methods that are acceptable under the OECD guidelines would not be appropriate for customs valuation purposes. And this is especially true where transfer prices are, I would say, established or based on operational profits. So that's one example. And finally, if I can, I also got several inquiries from businesses who simply wanted to ensure that that tariffs imposed under cross-border sales would just be legally payable by the customers, right? And in this case, of course, the objective is you would make sure that commercial terms or what we call Incoterms used in their supply agreements and other commercial documents are crystal clear regarding the responsibility to undertake the import formalities and obviously paying the import duties. And then you should know that subject to one exception, at least, commercial terms or Incoterms, they always provide that the purchaser is responsible to undertake custom formalities to clear the goods for import purposes. The exception is delivery duty paid. But the problem I've seen, and that's interesting, is that for certain clients, they realize that even if there are legal agreements, they provide for commercial terms where the purchaser should act as the importer of record. Their sales department or another department within the business, they are in fact selling goods to non-resident clients on a delivered duty paid basis, right? Meaning that in this case, it's the seller that is the importer of record in the country of import. So it's one thing to provide for the proper language, right, in the legal agreements, but all employees within the business or all employees involved in the sales process, they should make sure that the commercial terms are correctly applied in practice, obviously.
I want to drill down a little bit more on the but thank you, Jean-Guillaume, and I want to drill down a little bit more with the group on just some of the impact that we're seeing when it comes to tariffs on deal activity, deal flow, and Marc, Sylvia, you're both in the industrial space. This is obviously tariffs for you are meaningful. They've become part of the everyday conversation, and wanted to get a sense from you. I know I've been seeing now tariffs discussions and earnouts and tariff discussions, and frankly, I'm seeing sims for businesses that include tariff discussions.
Yeah.
And want to get a sense from you how you're starting to see the impact of tariffs on deals and how deals are starting to look differently, or the impact the tariffs are having on evaluating deal opportunities, marketing deals. And so we'd love to get your thoughts on the implications you're seeing of tariffs in the industrial space in terms of how you look at deals, how you evaluate, how you pitch deals, how you do deals. So,
Sylvia,
Marc, you want to go first?
Sylvia, you want to start?
Yeah, it's a tough question because again, it's a little bit early. Like we have not yet seen earnouts yet on deals proposed, and hopefully we don't. Nobody loves earnouts. Of course, we're absolutely including in marketing materials, absolutely making sure that our management are prepared to talk about it. And if the question isn't asked, if they bring it up, so it doesn't become the elephant in the room, without a doubt, on every discussion. But I think really, as we have the discussions with prospective buyers, it's going to be best received and best understood by PE investors that get the space. And so as we think about processes and we run processes, you've got, the agnostic, generic PE investors, or you have the ones who are very, very knowledgeable in a specific industry and they get it, or maybe because they have a portfolio company there. So those are the PE investors that are going to do well in this market, and they'll be successful in this market, as well as the strategics. But if you've got a generic PE or just like any services based, like CapEx light, they won't get it, right? They won't get it. And so that's how we are starting to see it differently. Earnouts, not yet. SIM, market materials, management presentations, absolutely coming out. Reevaluating suppliers without a doubt.
So if I could just follow, I've also seen some sellers who start to hire advisors specifically to manage the tariff issue, to kind of give it a. Have you seen any of that where people are kind of using extra resources to kind of frame a business so it looks better in the context of what the impacts of tariffs could be on a process.
Yeah. I
We
mean,
haven't. Sorry, Mark, please.
you go, Sylvia. Sorry.
No, my comment was just going to be no. That's true. The first time we have heard of it or of the concept that whether it'll come, but no, we're dealing with sometimes if it's a smaller business, sub 5 million EBITDA, which we don't play with, you won't invest those dollars, but you're selling a $20 million EBITDA business, that would make a lot of sense. But we haven't yet. We haven't yet seen the need. So I'm curious. We'll see. Mark, please.
Yeah, so I'd say, look, we're still early in those tariffs. As we said, there are no tariffs yet, but it's like as if we'd been under tariffs for 5 years. But there's a lot of strategies and that. So we have a lot of manufacturing businesses in our group, and conceptually, they're the ones who are the most impacted. We have a lot of distributors also who are mainly Canadian in nature, but they're not that impacted yet. But how much will they be impacted if there's a countervailing duty also? So there are questions in many areas that over the last 2 months, perhaps I think though that all of that uncertainty at some point also may bring some opportunities for investment. There's some businesses who may need help there. So, I mean, there's so much turmoil. It creates as much noise or problem as the actual tariff, perhaps even more. So that's how we view things.
I mean, Jean-Guillaume, we keep talking about the uncertainty over the potential U.S. tariffs to be imposed on Canada, but of course, there's also uncertainty on the potential Canadian countermeasures that might be imposed. And I mean, we hear all kinds of stuff, alcohol, liquor, other things that make the news. But I wonder, you've been doing this a long time. What is your idea of what we can expect from the Canadian kind of reaction to tariffs should they come into play? What could the countermeasures look like based on experience? Oh, I think we got on mute.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Mario, for the question again, an excellent one. But I should say that we already have a pretty good idea of what the Canadian countermeasures will be or will look like. And it's mostly because the Department of Finance, they already announced the plan, and it was on February 2nd. And also on the same day, you had Finance Canada who actually published the full list of U.S. goods that would be subject to the 25% duty, or what they call it, the surtax. And this would happen so they call it the first phase of the implementation of those countermeasures. But then you'll have a second phase, and an additional list of goods will be published. But the difference that time is that businesses will have 21 days to provide their comments to finance. So the goods, Mario, that you're referring to earlier, they were part of the first list, the first phase. So California wines or Harley Davidson motorcycles, they were a part of the first list that was already published. Now, of course, as you are aware right now, the Canadian plan or the countermeasures, they are imposed right now because the Trump administration agreed to postpone the imposition of the tariffs. Now, we don't know until when it's going to be the case. Would it be April 2nd or March 4th? We have to stay tuned. Now, the other reason, Mario, that we're not completely in the dark on the Canadian side is also based on one thing. It's because, as you may remember, the Trump administration already imposed tariffs back in 2018 on certain goods, but it was only on Canadian steel and aluminum products. And as I said, it was back in 2018. And in response, Canada also implemented the exact same type of countermeasures. The only exception is that at that time, the list of US goods that were specifically targeted in the list of of goods that were subject to the countermeasures back then, the list was more limited, as you can imagine, because the goods that were targeted in the U.S. Were also quite limited. It was only Canadian steel and aluminum products. And what happened then is that those tariffs, they stayed in place for almost a year. And then ultimately the U.S. finally renewed the exemption that was applicable for Canadian goods back then. But still, we had those tariffs for almost a year. Now, interestingly, again, you should know that the U.S. also announced 2 weeks ago that Canadian steel and aluminum products would again be subject to tariffs, and this would be as of March 12th. But the only difference here with the Canadian countermeasures that will be imposed, it's going to be slightly different than the ones that were imposed back in 2018, is that in this case, the countermeasures would only be applicable to U.S. steel and aluminum products. So we're talking about reciprocal tariffs in this case. And of course, the reason why it's because the list of products, or part of the list of products that were also included in the list back in 2018, now they're part of the first phase of the countermeasures, to the extent that U.S. tariffs are imposed on all products of Canada.
With that regard, what will be the impact that you see on deal flow if tariffs come into effect?
But it will definitely have an effect. But and as Jean-Guillaume said, we don't know for how long also. So yeah, they'll come into effect. We'll adjust. But do we need to adjust for the rest of our lives, or we need to adjust for the next year, the next 6 months, and the next 4 years? There's one thing I remember. I was young at the time, but I remember the pre-FTA time. I mean, Reagan and Mulroney signed the first FTA agreement in '89. I mean, before '89, we did business with the U.S. I mean, we opened a plant in Buffalo and a plant in Plattsburgh to be able to minimize the impact of tariffs. So we're going to survive after, but we're going to have to adapt. But we will survive, and we will manage it well.
Sylvia?
I do think we're going to see some sellers, I have discussions with, prospects that are contemplating sell, that some sellers who are going to say, well, you know what, we're just going to wait. We're going to wait a quarter. We're going to wait 6 months. And then as we engage, it's kind of like what happened when COVID hit in March 2020. It's like, if a deal was in process, it probably closed. But if it was just early stage, it was on hold. And so we'll have some until we have certainty here. But, you can't really time the market as well, right? Like first we had deals go on hold because, well, maybe it was a change in the capital gains inclusion rate. Thought that would happen, or it may not happen. Now we've got this. There'll be something else, right? And so, in our view, ultimately there's a buyer for every deal. And it's going to navigate, a scenario that year ends. Will it fundamentally change cross-border deals? I don't think so. I think, we will continue to have a U.S. buyer interest. Echoing Chip's point, like if you're a U.S. PE already familiar with the Canadian market, absolutely will continue. Maybe a new one, maybe a little bit not. But the reality is there's so much underplay capital, right? And Canada's attractive market, and we will continue to see interest in both north and south of the border.
Yep.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think long term, our industry is super good at adapting and figuring out where there are good opportunities. So I think the industry adapts. We always do. And I think there'll be great opportunities that will come out of this. They may look different than what the great opportunities were coming into it, but I think they'll continue to be there.
I'm going to take some questions. First question I have for the group: what kind of term structure could one put in place to de-risk potential tariffs if you're a buyer? If you're a buyer, what kind of term structure could one put in a deal to de-risk from potential tariffs? Anybody want to take that one? I could start on one part of that question. Earnouts. Earnouts are obviously, as Sylvia said, not something we like to talk about a lot. I think we may see more of them, but I do want to highlight to everyone that earnouts are much more complicated when it comes to trying to pass on tariff costs. As people know, earnouts tend to be focused on adjusted EBITDA. I think you're going to start seeing, people looking at earnouts in the context of maybe gross revenue as opposed to adjusted EBITDA from a buyer's point of view. It'll be interesting to see, but I think earnouts are definitely going to be one of the tools that people are going to consider as a buyer when you have an uncertainty over what the actual EBITDA is. Anything else from the group?
Yeah, obviously mechanisms by which you can, you can create flexibility in your price. I mean, is it, earnouts, are VTBs helpful? I don't know, but, I think that uncertainty is going to be, I hope so. The next 2 months are going to be the crux. I don't know, Jean-Guillaume, what you think, the next 2 months.
Yeah.
And we'll have a good feel after and earnouts and that. Then look, we know that the EBITDA went from 10 million to 4. Well, we kind of know what we're bidding on. Earnouts are probably a good way, Mario.
Question. I think this one is more of a Mark and Chip question. While the application of tariffs is still uncertain, companies are most likely doing some scenario planning. Other than reallocation of operations to the U.S., what other risk mitigating activities have you heard or seen or talking about taking, including workforce reduction, hiring freeze, etc.? Anything else? I mean, you obviously have your portfolio companies. Mark, you talked about mitigation strategies.
Yeah.
What do you?
One of the big thing, I was on a call yesterday. It's actually a U.S. business, and we're importing a lot from China. And I just learned, I thought it was 10%, and now there's another 10 this morning. And then we make steel products, but it's derivatives, but it seems they're included. So we have 10 plus 25, but we're looking, we're close to finding new suppliers in Vietnam, in Malaysia, in Cambodia, and that. Will that work, and how long will that work? So mitigating strategy, obviously the countries that are impacted by tariffs, if you can try, in China, basically we're asking, our Chinese supplier, they're very creative, to try to find, open a shop in Vietnam or open a shop in Thailand or things like that. So that's one strategy we've had.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's sort of sharing the pain up and down the chain. So going back to your suppliers, we're all in this together. Going to customers, passing through as much as you can, getting as much benefit as you can out of the suppliers. It's sort of hopefully you're relatively agile, understand where you make money, have alternatives in the medium term from a supply standpoint. But I think a lot of it is just recognizing that, you've got partners on either side and everybody's going to have to share the pain for a while.
Yeah, and there might be, and Jean-Guillaume, you may look negatively or positively on that, but there's some businesses where there might be classification. There's one product that we sell to, that we import, and we know that 3 other competitors import the same product, but 3 of them have different HTS codes. And not that I want to play the reclassification, because I guess we'll get caught in the system, but we have looked at those. There's one item that we have where we think there's there's the reasonable care, I believe, Jean-Guillaume, that you need to exercise with proper advice from the Stikemans of this world or the Deloittes of this world. You may be able to reclassify some products and categories that are less impacted.
Yeah, and you have also the option of obtaining an advance ruling on tariff classification as well, if there is any uncertainty, and maybe the competitors that are using another HS code might be because they obtain a ruling from the CBSC. It's possible.
Jean, you have a great question for you. Is the imposition of U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods in violation of the free trade agreement between Canada and the U.S.?
That's a great question, Mario, and I agree that it's right at first sight, right? You look at the tariffs, the U.S. tariffs, and they could definitely be viewed as being, if I stay polite, inconsistent with this USM. But the reality, Mario, is that it's a little bit more complicated than that, because this USMA, it includes what we call the security exception. And the point is that the security exception is way broader. The one that we have right now is USMA. It's way broader than the equivalent exception that we used to have in the former NAFTA, right? So essentially, Mario, the exception, it notably allows a party to the agreement to apply measures that the party would consider necessary for the protection of its own essential security interests. So here, because the White House, right, we know this is specifically argued that the smuggling of opioids from Canada to the U.S., it has created a national emergency and a public health crisis, right? This was in the executive order. So, of course, one could technically argue that the U.S. tariffs in this case would be allowed under the national security exception in this USMCA. Now, Mario, I'm pretty sure, and all the other panelists would also find this interesting, because you could have the same question under international law. And what you should know is that the imposition of tariffs, I mentioned this earlier, on steel and aluminum based on national security grounds that the U.S. imposed, this was challenged at the WTO level back in 2018. And you would not be surprised to hear that the WTO panel decisions, they all concluded that the U.S. tariffs did not fall within the essential security exceptions under GATT this time. Now, where it becomes even more interesting is that the WTO appellate body cannot hear the appeals filed by the U.S. And why is that? It's because there's been no judge in office since November 2020. And guess what? The appointment of new judges is currently blocked by the U.S. So the U.S. appeals, basically, they are in what we call into the void. And the dispute, in this case, could just be viewed as non-conclusive at this stage. So that's an interesting topic.
I know we've talked a little bit about this, but I got a few questions on, are you seeing more people shying away from wanting to do deals, when we said delaying deals, or people trying to take advantage of the current uncertainty? So I guess maybe for all the panels, is the uncertainty limiting the number of buyers out there? Is it creating opportunities in your world? I know we've talked a bit about this, but maybe thoughts. I mean, Sylvia, I know you see buyers closely. Are you seeing less buyers because of the uncertainty?
We have seen some PE buyers get nervous over tariffs just because, maybe the timing of the deal and because we really don't know the true impact of tariffs. So we absolutely are seeing tariffs maybe spook a few buyers, but it's almost like if they really if you really want to roll up your sleeves and really seek to understand it, then you could better quantify. But on the surface, on the cut, it's just like, you know what, we don't know. So yes, we are backing away. And so it kind of goes what I had said earlier. It's making sure that we, the buyers understand the sector, understand the impact, understand the market. And those are the ones that are competitive still in this process, in our processes that we're running. But there are a few that have started to shy away for it. And so we think about that as we think about timing a deal or when to launch. But in some cases, we're already in market, and then Trump makes his announcement.
I think the opportunities, if there are, it's too early to know what they are, what they could be. But there might be one or two sectors in particular that we'll see, wow, they're really affected, but they have ways to get out of that. And perhaps we can help them get out of a bad situation with, an injection of money or something like that. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree with Marc. I think in a period of time, like right now, the uncertainty makes it difficult to take advantage of opportunities like that. But I think the questioner raises a good point, which is in a really relatively short period of time, there will be opportunities created by this. Particularly, I think foreign capital tends to overreact because they don't totally understand the news. So you may find some inefficiencies in the pricing of deals for some period of time, or you might find a situation where you can provide assistance, financial or otherwise. It's important. It gives you some advantage in a process, but it's a little too early for all that.
Chip, Sylvia, Jean-Guillaume, and Marc, I want to thank you for joining us today. I think we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. I feel as though we might have to do this again in a few months once we have a better picture of the world. But really do appreciate you giving context in terms of your, the impact the tariffs are having on your lives and what you're seeing in the M&A and the deal community when it comes to tariffs. And Jean-Guillaume, thank you for teaching us all a little bit more about tariffs. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you for all of you for listening in.